There are many points. I just want to tease out three, four insights. One is that we have had strange relations with Saudi Arabia until very recently, but now the Saudis are interested in renewing relations with Thailand, and we also are interested in that. You mentioned there's some students here, Bernard Lewis. This author is not assigned this term, but I would leave that one of the best articles on the Middle East is The Roots of Muslim Rage by Bernard Lewis. It's a classic. So extra credit for students if you want to read that. This notion that these Islamist movements are creatures of the security services is something that we overlook around here, and that these creatures often turn against their creators. That's something that we want to also bear in mind. The last point about the likely defeat, the eventual defeat of the Islamic State, the Daesh, whether they will come over here, you seem to suggest that. That's very foreboding for us. That's very portentous, very alarming, and this requires vigilance. Let me come to our regional, local speakers, just for a short remarks. Elina Noor is a long-time colleague of mine. She's the Director of Foreign Policy and Security Studies at the ISIS also, another good ISIS. This is ISIS Malaysia, we have ISIS Thailand. This is Institute of Strategic and International Studies in KL. Elina.
So this will be ISIS on ISIS. Ajahn Titinan mentioned that there have been many firsts since the revered King Bhumibol passed on. And so this is my first time back in Bangkok since then, and I'd like to offer my deepest sympathies to our hosts and the people of Thailand on the passing of the late king. Let me put on the table 4 thoughts for discussion and consideration later on. I'd like to start with an overview of the Southeast Asian landscape. We've been concentrating on the Middle East or West Asia from this point of view. So let me offer some thoughts on, let me try to table some numbers to you, try to answer why some of the supporters and sympathizers of Daesh have chosen the route that they've chosen. And let me also talk a little bit about who they are, what kind of backgrounds they have. And I'll then go on to talk about 3 more points. So, what is the landscape like right now? I'll start with my country, Malaysia, because that's what I'm most familiar with. There have been about 200 people arrested in Malaysia on charges of terrorism, since 2013. These people who've been arrested are overwhelmingly Malaysian. Some of them have been foreigners, mainly from West Asia, Middle East, and North Africa, but by and large Malaysian. The numbers have risen year on year. So, for example, last year, the whole of 2015, there were about 80 plus people arrested in Malaysia. This year, up until August alone, there have been 90 arrests, and there have been more arrests in the months after that. In Indonesia, there are about 500 Indonesians in Syria. 500 may sound like a lot, but if you take into account the total population of Indonesia, it's a minuscule number. So I just like to emphasize that context behind that. What have groups like Daesh, and I'd also like to emphasize that a lot of the Malaysians, Indonesians, and 2 Singaporeans who have gone to Iraq and Syria, they've not only joined Daesh, they've also joined opposing groups to it. So they have joined groups like Jabhat al-Nusra as well as Ajnad al-Shams. What these groups have done in Southeast Asia is that they have given impetus to the local groups in this region to try to unite, or at least think about uniting, especially as the operations in Mosul go on now. And there have been discussions maybe about extending those operations to Raqqa. So following on from previous speakers, I think that maybe we can expect some sort of discussion or negotiations to take place among some of the groups here. There's been talk that Mindanao may be considered a regional hub. And I think this is not so much a question of a hierarchical decision from headquarters, so to speak, in Iraq and Syria, but mainly an ambition and a desire by regional groups to try to prove their image, their prestige, their legitimacy to their supporters and fan bases in the region, but also to boost their credibility to those whom they see as more superior to them in Iraq and Syria. Now, who are these people who either have been arrested or who have decided to travel to Iraq and Syria? There is no single profile. They come from different age groups, they come from different professional and non-professional backgrounds. So, for example, the police in Malaysia have arrested even an imam of a mosque. There have been senior officials in government arrested. There have been officers from the military and security services arrested. There have been technicians arrested. So they come from a range of different backgrounds. The youngest arrested is 15. The oldest that has been arrested is 54 thus far. So again, quite a range in terms of age. There have been those arrested who have been repeat offenders, and they go back to the Afghan alumni, so those who have fought against the Soviet invasion, and then and these are the hardcore ones. They joined Jamaah Islamiyah, if you remember, 15 years ago, the local iteration of Jamaah Islamiyah in Malaysia, the KMM, and they've continued to champion what they see as a good cause to their colleagues, but also the younger generation. But there have also been clean skins arrested, so those without a criminal record. And these are the younger ones usually who have taken to social media, to the internet, out of curiosity, out of ignorance, and have tried to travel to Iraq or Syria or tried to start up their own trouble in the country for various reasons. What are those reasons? Again, many reasons. Some of them have this genuine idea of wanting to redress the injustice and oppression that they see happening primarily in Syria and Iraq, but also in other places of the world. But they figured they'd start in Syria and Iraq because the infrastructure, so to speak, is there already. Some of them want to repent for their past sins, and they figure the best way of doing that is to fight in what they believe to be the cause of God. And if they die in the process, then even better, that's a bonus. Some of them feel that Malaysia in particular, also Indonesia, are not Islamic enough, even though they have a majority Muslim population. And so they emulate this idea of hijrah, right, migration to the Muslims to a so-called Islamic state. And some of them have adopted this Sunni Shia sectarian divide, and as predominantly Sunni countries in Southeast Asia, these Sunni Malaysian, Indonesian Muslims feel that they must fight in the name of a Sunni Islam because Shiism is not real Islam in their minds. And like I said, it's a win-win proposition to them. If they manage to travel abroad and fight, then great, 1 point. If they manage to die in the process as martyrs, then even better, 10 points, right? And if they decide to return to their home countries in the region, then they pass on their knowledge. Either way, they win. Even while they're there, they're also still passing on their knowledge. And they do this through, this is my second point, what is new, through social media. But before we get to social media, let me also talk about some other things that are new, because as this audience knows, terrorism is not a new phenomenon in this region. So what is new? The fact that there have been Malaysian, in my case, suicide bombers in Iraq and Syria is new. And it's a huge leap of faith, so to speak, for these Malaysians who've decided to commit suicide in a foreign country or foreign countries. What is also new is that there has been the involvement of families, women, and girls. Okay, so this time last year, in 2015, 10 women had traveled to Syria, 10 Malaysian women had traveled to Syria. And they did this primarily with their husbands who took their families with them. There was also a 14-year-old girl Malaysian girl who was arrested in the Kuala Lumpur International Airport. She was on her way eventually to Syria through Turkey because she had met this boy online through Facebook, and they were going to get married and do good things in the name of God. So social media technology has been a key contributing factor to radicalization, particularly among the younger generation, though not exclusively so. The Home Minister, Malaysian Home Minister and also Deputy Prime Minister last year reported to Parliament that of the then 107 detainees who had been arrested for affiliation with terrorism, 75% had been recruited through social media. Police officers have said that it used to be that individuals and groups would swear allegiance in person, so they would have to travel to a place, meet with the head of a particular group and swear allegiance, give the bay'ah. But now this can be done online, either through social media or through text messaging applications like WhatsApp, which is very popular, or Telegram. So there is this big shift in how things are being done. And you see, for example, the Malay and Indonesian-speaking individuals in Syria, for example, coming together, forming a group called Katibah Nusantara, producing a video, a YouTube recruitment inspirational video in Indonesian, some Malay as well, where they, at the end of this video, they toss their passports into this bonfire that they've created to show that they do not intend to return. And that there are no national borders that define them. They also recently produced a Malay language magazine called Al-Fatihin. My impression, and from speaking to people who have spoken to detainees and the police, is that this really hasn't gotten much traction. So even though it was produced in a very sophisticated manner with good images, text, solid text and all, it didn't receive very much traction. On social media, we like to think that social media crosses borders and projects this image of a universal community. Really, in reality, what happens is that it's quite segmented still. So the Malay Indonesian speakers still reach out to other Malay and Indonesian speakers, primarily because they're trying to recruit them to their cause, but also because there is a segregation of communities in places like Iraq and Syria. And anecdotes have been passed around about how Malaysians, Indonesians, Southeast Asians who have managed to get to Syria and Iraq are really treated like second-class citizens because they don't speak Arabic and they're not Arab. So they're a different color, they speak a different language, and some of them have been disillusioned because of this racism. And it's prompted partly some of the suicide bombing decisions that have been taken by Southeast Asians because they feel they need to prove themselves even more to be good Muslims to these Arabs who they see as more superior. I want to caution though that while we talk a lot about social media being this new driver of this wave of terrorism, technology and social media is really just a manifestation, an online manifestation of the bigger picture, the much, much bigger picture that takes place offline. So what happens online is really just the tip of the iceberg of what is going on in the lives of people offline. And we can talk a bit more about this later. My third point, I think this deserves a whole point of its own, and it's part of what is new, is this importation of the Sunni Shia split from the Middle East to West Asia to Southeast Asia. This has been played up domestically in countries in Southeast Asia, and there is a simplistic division of Sunni good, Shia bad, because many countries in Southeast Asia are predominantly Sunni. And you superimpose this sectarian split onto the largely plural communities in each Southeast Asian countries, you create this very, very risky and potent threat of fraying an already sometimes fragile fabric of community. So for example, my country, Malaysia, we have a good mix of people. We are only about 60-65% Muslim. And often we struggle already enough with questions of identity related to ethnicity, related to religion. You cut and paste this sectarian split. As a Muslim, then you have these questions of Sunni, Shia, intra-Sunni splits, and it becomes even more of a headache, not only for non-Muslims in the community, but also for governments, because they have to be very careful about how they craft policies without offending anyone. The context of Islam in this region, of course, is a very different picture. I mean, history will tell you that Islam in this region was historically a picture of tolerance, of acceptance, of syncretism. Syncretism, diversity, plurality have all become dirty words now in many Southeast Asian countries, and that's unfortunate, very unfortunate. What many Southeast Asian Muslims are now seeking is a puritanical brand of Islam, and so that's the ambition. And who is Southeast Asia turning to for that direction and guidance? West Asia, the Middle East. The context of both regions is very, very different. And I think we are forgetting this in Southeast Asia. So as countries in Southeast Asia work on counter-narratives, we must remember, first of all, that this counter-narrative of tolerance, of acceptance, of moderation is really the original narrative of this region. It is who we were and we should continue to be. And we should reclaim that with pride rather than reject it in embarrassment, because we seek to emulate a different people, a different community, a different context. Fourth final point. As we talk about countering this threat, this risk, we must remember that we are countering ultimately an ideology that is rooted in political grievances, not religious ones. And it is largely because of a failure of good governance, either real or perceived, in this region, countries like mine, or even further abroad. I've spoken to top generals about counterterrorism, and coming from Malaysia in particular, it's very strange to talk to military people about counterterrorism, because the history of Malaysia, Singapore, has largely been that counterterrorism is placed in the hands of law enforcement. And so I've had top generals say to me that they only come in when politicians and diplomats have failed. There will be times when military force will be necessary, and it will be a short-term necessity. But the root causes, again, are essentially ideological. And therefore, the measures to counter this ideology have to be structural, they have to be continuous, they have to include everyone, not just government, and they have to be focused on the long term. Good governance, again, is the grievance, or really poor governance is the grievance of many of these militants or wannabe militants. And therefore, good governance should be part of that solution. There should also be a depoliticization of religion. I know governments sometimes manipulate religion for political purposes. This can't be done. And finally, education. How we teach our children to think not only about questions of the secular world, but also questions of faith and of religion in this region is very important. Let me end with a comment and a very short story. The comment is that ultimately human beings want to live in dignity and they don't want their governments to mess them up. How do you preserve this dignity even when you have committed a crime because you believe that you want to change the ideology? So how do you accord even an arrested person who's about to be charged with terrorism, how do you accord that person dignity? This is a story told to me by a police officer in Malaysia. And I think the police unfortunately get a lot of criticism, but I think the counter-terrorism department of the Royal Malaysia Police really deserve a lot of credit for their professionalism. And there's a story told to me about how they conduct arrests. When they go to arrest someone who is suspected of a serious militant or extremist threat, they go to a person's house. If the person's family is in the house with them, they will not pull out the handcuffs on the suspect. Instead, they will speak quietly to the suspect and say, can you come with us? They tell him what he's about to be charged with, he's about to be taken to the police station, but they speak very, very quietly, very softly and politely to him, unless he poses a physical threat. Once he is out of sight of his family, only then, when he is in the police car, an unmarked police car, will they put the cuffs on. And months, years later down the road, according to the police, these detainees remember that because that was the first encounter with a police officer upon arrest. And they don't harbor grudges, so to speak, because they were treated with respect and dignity, even though they were going to be charged with an offense. And I think this is something we should bear in mind, that even if we do not agree with a person, we should always treat them with respect and dignity. I know this might sound like a flaky way to end remarks on a hard security issue, but I think it's very important to take it down and take it back to basics. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Elina. One major point, the Muslims here, there's an ethnic factor to it, that they're not Arabs. We have to bear that in mind also. We had Jamaat Islamiyah 10-15 years ago, and this is something that I think it may be inevitable that we will have some kind of renewal of terrorist movement in the region. Ajahn Srisampop kap, floor is yours. I think Ajahn, can we have a short one from you? We have had some, we have not had lone wolves in Thailand, but we've had actually the opposite, which is coordination, a lot of coordination. Are we going in that direction, Ajahn? Is there going to be more Islamist influence and penetration in the south? Dr. Srisampop Jitpiromsi is the head of the Deep South Watch. They collect a lot of data on the violence in the Malay Muslim insurgency. More than 6,000 have died in the deep south of Thailand. It puts Thailand as a top 10 internal conflicts in the world. And there's no end to it, it seems. Ajahn, Ajahn.
For me, I would like to go into some details of the movements in the Deep South, but it might different from the background of Islamists that we heard today. But I will try to relate it to some wings of that movements that could be developed to be kind of radical Islamist movement based on some specific context of the situation in the deep south of Thailand. To begin with, I would like to summarize the general situation that the violent conflict in Thailand in the deep south have special characteristics relevant to the insurgency pattern of violence more than the kind of terrorism. So by nature, it looks more like insurgency than the terrorism for the violent conflict in the deep south. So the root causes of conflict in the Deep South is the identity politics, and the Malay Muslim in the Deep South of Thailand are very proud of an identity of the Malay, of the Muslim, of the Patani. So it's a combination of the three components. Some components would be considered a kind of religions or Islam. But it's really local, it's very specific for local identities, not quite directly related to the movements, international movements. So this is a basic conflict that is going on now. And the objective, the target, the time and the space tools of violence incidents define the nature of the southern insurgency. I will show you a little bit. And the conflict dynamics on the ground embody the contesting forces from the society and the polity that gradually contain the escalation, ups and downs, or fluctuation of the violence, but it have certain limit of the escalations because of the intrinsic forces that could contain it. So I will go skip this part. You see the pattern of violence, and so this is a pattern of violence that define the characteristics of the southern Thailand's incidents of violence. This is the kind of incidents of violence: bomb shooting, arsons, disturbances, all kind of things. Mostly the shootings and bomb for over 12 years, and you can see that all around, the areas, the dots, just very intensive. But it's the pattern of violence cluster. It cluster within the specific area of southern border provinces. This is really special characteristics of the insurgency. Sometimes it's moved up to the upper south, like Hat Yai, Songkhla, or sometimes to the upper south, but not really. It hardly happened in the upper south or in Bangkok. Sometimes it happened. So you can see the pattern, the major patterns of the violence. It's concentrated in these regions only, and when you identify the conflicts hotspots, you can see that the conflict hotspot represents some kind of locations that have linked to the local history, local historic place, like the old or the ancient towns of Patani regions. Hundreds years ago, used to be independent of these kingdoms, but they have their own center of power, civilization. So the hotspot of the violence for over 12 years have concentrated on this kind of city or town that have these historic locations like Rangets in Narathiwat, or like some many places in Narathiwat, in Patani, and in Jala, Raman, Jala. All these places and in the red spot, as you can see that this is the intensive places of the violence, have the local history. So that means you have really strong identification of the local identity of movements, of the networks of the insurgency. So this is a kind of nature of the pattern of violence. This is the shootings spread around, scattered around the regions. But center the pattern of the shootings also, some places that has specific meanings, historical meanings, or concentration of the local Malay Muslim identities. So this is explosion, and then the same pattern. You can see that's the same pattern. Arsons, scattered around, destruction of property. From comparative perspectives, many conflicts become less a matter of the original and underlying troubles, but more a matter of becoming trapped in the extended action-reaction sequences. So later on, after the the escalation of violence, for sometimes local conflict, local violence become personal, look like more personal or related to some kind of crimes. That is normal in different places around the world. But there's some factors that you can see from the variation of violence here. Another factor, another intrinsic factor that should be considered is the conflict dynamics on the ground, embody the contesting forces. I just mentioned about that from the society and the polity or the government policies that gradually contain the escalation. I would like to emphasize on the endogenous mechanism emerges in different formations, including the peace process, the change of the government policies, and the evolving movements of the civil society, local civil society. These are inertia or the innate forces that contain the local violence. All sections of population, to be sure, have been affected by the violence. Even recently, we had bombs in the market, and innocent people die. So it's very things happen every day like this. So this is a general pattern. Right now, around 6,700 people die from the incident of violence in the Deep South. Most of the deaths were Muslims, around 60% Muslim, around the rest Buddhists, but that is the proportion of the population. And around 12,000 people got injured from the violence as well. So this is the general pattern in the long term. It's a time series of the incidents of violence. You can see that it is up and down, for over 12 years. And in recent times, it also up and down like this. It is obvious that this is kind of we need to have a development of the peace process to solve the problem. I would like to summarize some of the suggestions for the process to prevent the escalation of violence and the development of some radical groups that could be developed into the more extremist. So into over 12 years, there were two peace dialogues, and the first dialogue in 2013, and that's is stopped because of the political crisis in Bangkok, and recent peace dialogues within this during this government have developed until now, but it's not quite progressive, but it's still going on. Things happen that in the first round of peace dialogue during 2013, there were some groups of the insurgent movements in the BRN that disagree with the peace process, peace talk, disagree with what they have done with dialogues, with the peace dialogue, and this is a group that have keep on fighting, and in the second round of the peace dialogues during this government. Again, we have the same issue that when a group of insurgents talked to the government, another group didn't agree with that, and violence on the ground still expanded, to some extent. So this is a pattern that we are concerned that the groups of uncompromised or the group that disagree with the peace talk or peace process might have developed to a kind of radical groups later on, because they have no space, no way to talk to the other groups, and this is part of the BRN, the major actors of violence. Some sources say that they are called, the name of this cliques is called Day One Level C. This is group. And recently in Bangkok, the Thai government have arrested a group of young Malay Muslims from the Deep South who live in Bangkok. That might be the attempt of the Thai security to contain this group in the operation, in the security operation. That is concerning trends. If this group of people have no way out or under more contained situation, they will pick up some kind of radical violence, and it might have a negative impact, a very negative impact on the situation in general. And I think that this is a concern that we should have in the peace process in the Deep South. And this group of young radical Malay Muslim might find a way out by turning to a kind of Middle East or Islamist approach, and it's really difficult to solve in the long terms. So this is the general situation in the Deep South, and I would like to summarize. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn Kap. I'm sorry that we are running out of time, but you can also access, we all have all of this on YouTube, by the way, so you can watch it subsequently, all the presentations. Ajahn Sisampop's Deep South Watch website has a lot of data and analysis and so on, so you can follow and you can find some elaboration. The key here, I think, is that if the peace talks don't make progress and the insurgency persists and festers for longer, the insurgents could turn to outside for a more radical solution. Now, we've run out of time, but I'll take 1 or 2 minutes. If there's any reaction from the floor, we'll entertain them. But if not, any reactions? Okay.
I'm very pleased to hear about all what they have said, and I've learned a lot, but I have 4 points. The first one, sectarian roots are not necessarily the...
I'm sorry, questions and comments. I mean, I don't want to...
It's a comment, it's 4 comments.
Okay, it's not a prepared statement or anything like that.
No, it's 4 comments. Sectarian roots are not necessarily the root cause of the clashes in the Middle East. We have Libya, where they don't have the presence of the Iranian. Secondly, the proposed role of the US. It is not the role of the US. There is a designated body, which is the Security Council. The US has to abide by whatever the Security Council does and play its role in proportion to what it does. Intervention and vacuum. There was an intervention in the 90s under the United Nations in Iraq. It did not create a vacuum. There was an intervention in Libya. It created a vacuum. There was an intervention in Iraq early this millennium. It created a vacuum. So intervention and vacuum, it has to be studied. Lastly, regarding Egypt, which was highlighted as a cornerstone to the movement, I totally agree with what was said, that Islamist movements are after power, nothing else. The relation with Turkey, is a little bit different, because Egypt, which was the only country that had Islamists in power after the Arab Spring, and we overthrew them with a series of peaceful revolutions, and Turkey singles us out at the highest level, which is not quite fair, and this would explain the situation.
I notice all the countries involved in this political movement are all very wealthy in resources of oil and gas. I was just wondering from the first three, well, all speakers, what any correlation they have with the funding of this political movement is like Bin Laden, of course, was a rather wealthy gentleman. Are there other people behind all this, like you talk about the CIA and other security forces? Besides them, is there another faction financed by oil reserves, oil money that is financing this whole operation?
You have various sources. They start off getting something from front agencies for security services. Afterwards, we've had a long series of funding coming from private people. I mean, these groups have their fundraisers that travel and visit wealthy people who sympathize with their causes, and they were raising money. That's why there were a lot of laws passed in many places that have limited the free transfer, the free flow of money that used to be in the past. Now we saw Daesh become self-financed, when they occupied large pieces of Iraq and Syria. They were selling oil. They were imposing taxes on people, the residents, tariffs on borders and so forth. So they are very resourceful. Also, it was proven that organized crime played a role, as being proven in South America with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was raising a lot of money through deals with the drug cartel in South America. So these groups are very resourceful when it comes to raising funds.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to have to call it that. Our speakers, they have to travel to their next destination. This it has been an absorbing morning. Thanks so much to our speakers. We've been privileged today. Also to Elina Noor, Dansi Sompop, Pirom Ehud Ya'ari, Mr. Riad Kahwaji, and Professor Dr. Ghassan Atiyyah. Thank you so much. A lot to still absorb and digest. We have a YouTube video, so you can watch retroactively, subsequently. But please join me in thanking the speakers today for their insights, for their presentations.